Okay, so it's 8:02 on the East Coast. Good evening, everyone, wherever you're joining us. I'm so excited to announce the renaissance of IUC Alumni Talks, and many thanks to Kelsey. Without you, I don't think we can bring this back. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, the whole organizing committee. Today, we're so honored to have Sarah Lubman joining us. And the title for today's talk is The Art of the Pivot, Writing, Wordsmithing in Japan. Next slide, please. Before we start, we're just going through some simple logistics, and you should be muted upon entry. And then you can, of course, change your display name to your first name, last name, and IUC graduation year. I'll do that later. And then, yes, so next slide, please. And so here is today's program. We'll have some introduction about IUC Alumni Talk, and then a more formal introduction of our guest for today. And then we're going to have a moderator-led conversation for 35 minutes roughly. And today we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. So please, as we go through the interview, please just type in your questions in the Q&A, and then we will just transfer those questions onto the slide, and then our interviewer will ask about those questions, and then we're going to have some wrap up, and then at from 9 p.m. or 10 a.m. in Japan, we're going to have an optional post-event networking for 30 minutes, basically 2 rounds of 15-minute breakout rooms. So if you would like to stay, you're more than welcome to stay and network with other IUC alumni. Next slide, please. So here's the organizing committee for this event. We have more members, but 4 core members work on producing this event. Unfortunately, Sabrina is not able to join us today. I am Tarani, and then I'll have others introduce themselves. John,
Hi,
please.
I'm Mariah.
Oh,
Hello,
sorry.
hi, I'm Mariah.
I am Juan Felipe. Nice to meet you all.
And I'm Kelsey. I'm the Alumni Relations Officer. So, not exactly part of the committee, but happy to help.
Thank you so much. And next slide, please. So IUC Alumni Talks is a web series that aims to create a space for the IUC Alumni Network to share their personal journeys with each other and interested public, including future IUC students. So I'm so thrilled to know that we should have some current students, some incoming students, and many, many alumni joining us today. I'm so looking forward to the talk. And through this series, we hope to build a strong community among people with diverse associations with Japan. And you can always check out our YouTube channel at this link or scan the QR code below, or you can simply just search for IUC Alumni Talks in YouTube, and then you'll find all the previous talks. And this talk will also be available shortly after today's event. Next slide, please. So these are all our past speakers. We have already have a couple. As you can see, we have many leaders and from all sorts of fields. And all these titles refer to the job title of the speaker at the time that they did the event with us. Next slide, please. So we've had 13 talks up till now, and today is our 14th one after 3 years. Next slide, please. So now I'm turning the stage to Mariah, who is the interviewer for today and who will officially introduce our guest. Mariah, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Tarani, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone, or good evening, everyone, depending where you are. And welcome to the IUC Alumni Talks. I'm delighted to introduce our first guest speaker in this revived series, Sarah Lubman, IUC class of 1985. Sarah has had a very impressive career across journalism, corporate communications, and strategic advisory work. She worked as a journalist for ABC News, UPI and NPR in Tokyo and Beijing, Wall Street Journal and San Jose Mercury News in the US, and later advised Japanese companies on corporate reputation, crisis management, transactions, and activist shareholder defense. She also led global communications for SoftBank Group. Beyond these career highlights, Sarah's experience is especially relevant to us as members of the IUC community. Her career shows how Japanese language training, cross-cultural understanding, and professional flexibility can open up many different paths. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I did want to say just before we get started that when we first started talking about this and you guys were asking me about my career, it sounds completely random, but there are two through lines that go through it. And one of those is, I would say, words and writing in different ways, and the other is Japanese. And so, it's not completely, it sounds chaotic, but it kind of makes sense in the long run.
It does. When we met up for our first chat in April, one thing that really struck me was that your path was, as you said, not a straight line, or you also used zigzag. So we thought that was especially valuable for current and future IUC students to hear, because many of us feel pressure to know exactly where we are going to end up. But your story shows that you do not need to know where Japanese will take you for that to matter. So could you please share with us, how did you become interested in Japan and Japanese?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely family influence and a little bit of rebellion. So my father was a specialist in Chinese law, and I went to elementary school, first couple years of elementary school in Hong Kong. So I had exposure to Asia early on. And in fact, first went to Japan maybe when I was 8 or 9 years old. And I think that in a way it was a kind of rebellion. It's like, well, China is my dad's thing, so I'll do Japan. I was also really interested as a kid in myths and fairy tales, and probably when I was around 9 or 10, and don't have your children do this, I don't recommend it. I read Yukio Mishima's book, The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea. The Japanese title is Gogo no Eiko, so nothing to do with the English title. But I thought it sounded like a fairy tale. So, and my parents had it, in their library. And so I read it and I was really fascinated with, where did this come from? It was completely alien and obviously nothing like the fairy tale I thought I was going to get.
Uh-huh. Well, I have to say that English translation is actually quite misleading. I can also kind of relate to, what you said about rebellion, because my father works in the legal field and he wanted me to be a lawyer, and here I am doing something completely different. But you studied religion and Japanese at Berkeley, and originally imagined pursuing a PhD in Japanese literature. So then what drew you to IUC?
Yeah, so I was a double major in religious studies and Japanese. I knew that I wanted that I was going to focus on Asia and specifically Japan. And so for that reason, I wanted to know more about my own cultural background. So religious studies was a great way to take, all kinds of different courses, philosophy, sociology, history, while at the same time just immersing myself in Japanese. And I thought that I wanted to pursue a study of Japanese literature. So I heard about the IUC, I applied to it, and I was told I was actually discouraged from going because they said, what I was told at the time was, you really should wait. I mean, back then, most of the students at IUC were, heading towards academic careers. It was a much more academic group, I think. And the thinking was, you really should wait until you've started your PhD program and not go in between undergraduate and the master's, which is what I wanted to do. So I ignored them and went anyway.
Wow.
And I'm glad. Glad I didn't listen. Don't always listen. First piece of advice.
I love that. I love that. Be a rebel.
Yeah, exactly.
So then what do you remember most vividly about your time at IUC?
I mean, first of all, I remember getting there and I'd had, I guess, 3 years of Japanese, including 1 or 2 years that were intensive. And then you get there, and of course, it's so much faster than you're just, I remember feeling completely deflated when I first landed in Tokyo. I was like, oh my God, how am I ever going to do this? So, when IUC started, when class started, I was feeling a little apprehensive. And the head of IUC at the time was Delmer Brown. And on the very first day, he said, talk as much as possible. Don't be embarrassed. I encourage you to talk as much as possible. And I remembered that because in the beginning, you do feel, I think, tentative. Even Japanese worry about speaking properly. As a woman, sometimes, it was expected that you might not talk as much. So you have all those expectations, and it was really good to have somebody say from day one, just talk. Don't worry, just talk. And so that really made an impression on me.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's still the rule at IUC that you are not allowed to speak any other language other than Japanese, I think. What was it like that back then as well?
That's a good question. I don't remember that. I mean, I did have the benefit of, I had a whole sort of, I had a big Japanese community outside of IUC, and that was through karate, which I had studied for I've been practicing for about 3 years before I went. I think I went over as a brown belt to Japan, and I was introduced to a dojo by my then boyfriend who had practiced with these guys. And it was a little bizarre, but it turned out that it was the self-defense forces. The back in the day there, the headquarters, there was a honcho in Ebisu, I think. Or no, maybe it was in Roppongi, actually. Was it Roppongi? I don't remember where the old self-defense headquarters were. Anyway, but so yeah, the practice was in Ebisu. I think their HQ was in Roppongi. But they practiced 3 times a day, morning, noon, and evening. And then every weekend there was a 3-hour practice in Ebisu. And these were all like pretty working class, for the most part, Japanese, with the exception of the Shihan. And I practiced with them on the weekends and then with another group during the week. And I remember one night after practice, they would always go out to eat and drink afterwards. And I peeled off because I was going to go home and study because I had a test the next day. And they said, where are you going? And I said, well, I have a test. And the sensei said, kore mo benkyou da yo, like this. And I thought, he's right. I'm going to learn more if I do that. I mean, the downside of that was that my Japanese, I had to get some, I guess, some special lessons at IUC. They pulled me aside and said my Japanese sounded too masculine, so I had to have like feminization lessons. Oh my God. So yeah. But the IUC, we were encouraged early to talk. And then I would say I was encouraged outside of the IUC to talk in a different way. And both of those kind of came together really well for me.
Wow, when you I just love it every time you say kore mo benkyou da yo, because I can actually see that, the masculine tone in that, one simple phrase.
Yeah.
So I would like to ask you a broader question based on that. Because what did IUC and life in Japan teach you about the parts of language that go beyond grammar and vocabulary?
Yeah. Well, one thing is, like I said, we were encouraged early to speak, and I decided that I wasn't going to try to change my personality. I was going to be me, but in Japanese. That does mean, especially in Japanese, like there is a physicality to every language. There are gestures that come with every language. I think actually Americans, we gesture more with our hands. You don't do that in Japan. There's body language, there's bowing, like there's certain things you can't say without bowing. It becomes kind of habitual. So I think I learned to soften my intonation and to adapt language depending on the context and who I was speaking with. I also was kind of freelancing. There was a English language kind of magazine back then. I think it was called Tokyo Journal, and I was interning there, and there were a bunch of Japanese there, and they were very different than my karate nakama, So I learned that you speak differently with different people. You use different language with different people. I remember once I wanted to introduce these two Japanese friends who are from very different worlds. They're both women in their like 30s. And I said I was going to go have lunch with a friend, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to invite this other friend." And she asked me in Japanese, it was like, "What kind of person is she?" I don't remember the exact language. And I realized, oh, that doesn't really work. Like, you don't just casually invite another stranger to come along, at least not then, with someone. It was like, where does she come from? That kind of thing. And I realized that sort of casual notion of, hey, I'll just have this other friend randomly join me was kind of a rude thing to do to my friend who thought that we were just going to go out by ourselves. And this was all women, so there was nothing, it wasn't a dating situation. But I do think that, so I learned different social, I guess, strata, different ways of speaking, masculine, feminine. And then this connected later to corporate work, understanding how Japanese clients communicated, understanding that when a client said, we'll consider it, kento shimasu, that actually probably that meant no. And understanding that actually the real conversation would happen after the formal meeting. And I remember once my colleagues at Brunswick Group, where I worked for 13 years, after being a journalist, we were talking about a trip to Japan, and one of them said, we don't need to have a formal presentation. We'll just show up and have a conversation. And I said, no, that doesn't work. Like, they don't know what Brunswick is or what it does, and you can't just show up and shoot the breeze. Like, it doesn't work that way. I think there are situations where it could, but so I felt I was also helping my colleagues in the US and the UK and other countries understand the dealing with Japanese customs, as well as helping Japanese companies understand why activists were behaving the way they did and what they needed to say to defend themselves and their businesses.
Wow, that I can't agree more. And thank you so much for bridging that with your career, because I wanted to ask, as after IUC, you actually did a degree in Japanese literature and then lived in Beijing, and then eventually started your career in journalism, because you didn't actually start working in Brunswick Group immediately. So could you maybe talk about how you moved from academic training into journalism? Because these two things
very different. I mean, there were two pivots. One was academia to journalism, and I will say I had always wanted to be a journalist as a kid. There's a book called Harriet the Spy. I thought I looked like Harriet. I walked around with a little notepad. I'm sure I was really annoying. I even had my own neighborhood newspaper. And I did work. So I was always kind of I was circling around journalism. I worked for ABC News. So the year after IUC, I stayed another year in Japan and worked for ABC News. I was their it was called night editor, I think. And basically what that meant was you watch Japanese newscasts, and if anything important happened or something urgent, then you would let the staff, the producer and the reporter, the correspondent in Japan know, and then you would write a summary of these news reports every night. So that was really good for my Japanese. So I was watching, and there was some translation sometimes. I will say I learned pretty quickly that I did not want to be a translator. And especially later when I was an advisor, if you're translating, you're not advising. So you gotta pick a lane. But back to the journalism thing, I did after IUC and after the year working for ABC News, I went to UCLA and got a master's it was master's in Asian studies, but the focus was on Japanese literature. And this was allegedly in between, on the way to a PhD. And I think I realized, like, this just isn't for me. I didn't have the passion for the subject. I thought that this was a stretch, but I thought that maybe it isn't just Japanese literature. What if I did Chinese and Japanese literature, comparative literature, which is an insane idea, especially for someone who isn't a native speaker of either language. But I think that was my way of trying to figure out a different path. And so I went to Beijing University to study intensive Chinese. And also I was kind of focused on, traditionally, if you're studying Japanese literature, then you're doing classical Japanese, and then you also have to learn classical Chinese. But I took modern Chinese instead. So I think I was trying to find a way out. I got to Beijing. I realized I am not going to go get a PhD. Who am I kidding? Like I was very unhappy, and I thought I just need to figure out how to do what I really want to do, which is journalism, not TV news. I knew that. Now, mind you, I went in 88. This was early 89. The student democracy protests were just starting. And I went around. I did know, so I'd met some journalists and people gave me names. And this will be something we'll talk about the importance of talking to people who do what it is that you want to do, and ask them, what advice would you give to somebody like me who wants to be a journalist? And people were very generous and gave me names. I went to Hong Kong and went around and talked to all the news agencies, and went back to Beijing as a stringer for the Hong Kong Standard. I think it's still around, English language paper. And then the student democracy protests started, and they started at Beijing University and another university, University of Politics and Law. And I was right there on campus. So I started reporting on it. And then all during the protests and the crackdown, I started, in addition to working for the Chinese paper, I was a stringer for the Washington Post. And after 1989, after the crackdown, I remember people telling me, people are going to freak out and leave China, and you should stick around because this is how careers get made. And that's exactly what I did. So I got a job working for UPI. I was a local hire, which meant I had housing through UPI, but I was able to freelance for others. So I was NPR's Beijing stringer for a couple of years and wrote for many other newspapers and the Chronicle of Higher Education, and basically anybody who would pay to read a story about China. So, and then after that, I was in China for 4 years, and then I went back, worked for the Wall Street Journal, San Jose Mercury News, Newsweek International. It was a total of 17 years in journalism.
Wow.
And I really loved it.
Wow. Well, I find that part of your story particularly fascinating, because it seems to me that Japanese became less central for a little while, but it didn't actually disappear entirely. And it just came back later in a very intentional way. So how did you actually intentionally bring Japan and Japanese back into your career? Maybe first through Brunswick Group?
Yeah, I did. I mean, every now and then there would be a Japan related story I could write. Like I wrote a story at the Wall Street Journal about you had these Japanese students who maybe had flunked out of a Japanese university and were going to school in LA, and there was a Japanese detective who was like checking up on them and reporting back to their parents. So I wrote a story about that. But it was kind of hard to do. And I started to feel like I was missing it. I had actually gone to the San Jose Mercury News because they had this Pacific Rim reporter job. And I thought maybe I could, tap back into Japan that way. But I became a mom. I had twins. Like I clearly wasn't going to be going to Japan anytime soon. And I really started feeling a bit unfulfilled. It was like this itch that wasn't getting scratched. I went back to Japan, and then an opportunity came up. My husband was recruited for a job in New York. We were living in the Bay Area at the time, San Jose Mercury News. He was recruited to be deputy budget director under Bloomberg. So this was in 2005. So all of a sudden we were moving to New York. So I needed to look for a new job. I did get a job as Asia editor for Newsweek International, but again, no chance to go to Japan, budgets are shrinking, et cetera. And during this time, I guess it was the summer before we moved out there, I went back to Japan to see my former karate, the Shihan from the self-defense forces, who was dying of cancer. We all pretended he wasn't dying of cancer, but in fact he was. And I went to see him in the hospital. And after we talked, he said, I'm not done. Actually, after we got together, someone called me and said, Shihan says he's not done and you need to come back. So I went back and saw him, and he said, so what are you doing? Are you using your Japanese? And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, like, what are you doing? And I thought, yeah, もったいないよ. And I thought, he's right. It was really just an epiphany. Like, why am I not doing this? So I decided, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do, especially after Newsweek International. I thought, journalism there needs to be another way. So I made two lists. My lists were who used to be a journalist and isn't anymore. What are those people doing? Would I like what they're doing? And then the other list was who is doing something that's connected to Japan? What are those people doing? Do I like what they're doing? And every person I met with, I would say, give me more names of people to talk to. And then I would call those people. You know what? People like to talk about themselves. They like to give advice. So I also approach this the way I would an investigative story. Sometimes when you're working on an investigative story, you kind of know what answer you're driving for, but sometimes you really don't, and you're just following leads. And so I decided I was going to sort of investigate my own life and figure out, where the path was. So I was talking to these people, to these two lists of people, and I talked to all kinds. I went to the Japan Society. I mean, all kinds of things came up, by the way. It was really interesting.
Wow.
Eurasia Group. Um, and then somebody said, you should talk to Steve Lippin, a former colleague of mine at the Wall Street Journal. He works for this firm called Brunswick Group, and they do corporate communications. I thought, that sounds boring. I went in and talked to him, and it turned out they had a number of Japanese clients. This was like in the mid 2000s, 05, 06. There was a first wave of activism in Japan, and they were helping them defend against activism. Nobody spoke Japanese. Brunswick was really small. It's quite big now, but back then there were maybe 35, 40 people in the US, and nobody in the whole firm, I don't think, who spoke Japanese. And we talked, and they kept having me come back and talk to more people. And every person I talked to, I said, what do you do all day? Tell me what you do. Like, you describe the business and the boilerplate that goes on the website. They didn't even have a website, I don't think, by the way, but a proper website. But I asked them, what do you do all day? I don't, help me understand what you do. And somehow it just clicked, and they hired me. And on my second week, maybe it was my first week, they sent me to Japan to pitch a client.
Wow.
It was terrifying. Terrifying. But I had also kept my Japanese up, by the way. So while I was living in New York, I was taking courses like Japan Society, and then later another place had these sort of advanced discussion groups about business and economics and financial news. So I was keeping my Japanese up. I wasn't going in cold. But yeah, so my first, I guess, maybe 5 years at Brunswick, I did a lot of that. It was really the most gratifying work of my time there, or among it, was helping a couple companies, big companies, fend off activist shareholders. And I really felt I was using every brain cell, everything I knew. And it just felt like what I was supposed to be doing. And also, you're learning all about the business. You're navigating these two cultures, and you're still talking to journalists all the time who are still my people.
That's true. That's true. Just wanted to, ask you a follow-up question, because you said you didn't know what they were doing, but then as you talked to them, things just clicked. What exactly was clicking for you?
What was clicking? I think it was helping the two sides understand each other. It was helping the Japanese companies understand how to deal with the sort of Western mindset, particularly activists, and how to explain yourself and defend your business. When we would have some pretty vigorous conversations, and sometimes they would bring up I remember once they brought up a certain point, and we said, you know what, that they wanted us to say to journalists, that they wanted it to be part of the narrative or part of the messaging also against the activists. And we said, you know what, that is not going to work. So it's not that we don't think, we understand why it's important to you, but we recommend that we don't say it, and we say these other things instead. So sort of having to be diplomatic in a way about what would work. Then I would say what clicked. I also I think I also realized that the perfect can be the enemy of the good. Like, okay, your Japanese doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes you might find a client and we would who understood English really well, but they wanted to speak in Japanese. Sometimes they
Mm,
wanted the whole conversation to be in Japanese. Like, it's flexible. Also, it's kind of insulting to your host if they understand what you're saying,
mm,
but you insist on, maybe whatever works for them is fine. You should not be doctrinaire and I'm going to do it all
mm,
in perfect Japanese. Well, you probably won't, but maybe that's okay. I think obviously they need to know that you're mutually understandable. But if
mm,
somebody would like to say some things in English or speak to you in Japanese, then it's totally fine. It really doesn't matter
mm,
as long as the job gets done.
mm,
Um, I think that if you get too hung up on formal Japanese, you can sort of psych yourself out.
mm,
I mean, you do get used to it, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. But you
mm,
shouldn't kind of over
mm,
rotate on that.
mm,
Um, and then actually, when I went to SoftBank, that was really
mm,
fun because now I was inside a Japanese company, although I will say it is not a typical Japanese company at all.
mm.
Um,
Wow.
as everybody knows, it's Masa is a maverick and SoftBank is a maverick company, but there were also
Mm,
things about it that were very Japanese. And so that was
mm,
really fun for me to be in a
mm,
Japanese environment until COVID
mm.
happened. Then it was no fun.
So how did you actually, get into SoftBank from, Brunswick Group?
That was actually through somebody I had worked with very closely, Gary Ginsberg. One of my big clients was AT&T,
Mm,
and AT&T had when it bought Time Warner, it was challenged. There was an antitrust trial. Gary Ginsberg
mm,
was head of communications for Time Warner, so we got to know each other throughout the antitrust trial. And he was recruited to be chief communications officer for SoftBank, so he recruited me as his number two, and then he left, and so that's how it happened. Yeah.
wow. So I guess my takeaway here is talk to as many people as possible.
Yeah, I mean, talk to people. And as I said, everybody you talk to, you ask for name more people to talk to, and you call all those people and
Yeah.
don't be shy about it, really.
Mm,
And when I meet people now who want to know, like, what should I just met I just met this kid the other day. I was
mm,
buying the Wall Street Journal, and he said, "Oh, it's my
mm,
dream to work at the Wall Street Journal." I said, "It is." And we started talking, and it turns out he's a young journalist. And I said,
mm,
I have people for you who you should talk to. He said, "Do
mm,
you have any advice for me?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I've got, people." And he's very interested in AI. And so I said, "Here are some,
mm,
I have a lot of friends who are, senior journalists, or they just retired. So you should
mm.
call all these people." So now he's doing it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting. So the next question that I wanted to ask is, if you could go back in time, would you do anything differently?
Uh, yes and no. I mean, no, because, I am where I am and I went where I went. And so,
Mm,
um, I don't regret anything. If I hadn't gone to
mm,
grad school, I wouldn't have had that opportunity of a lifetime to break into journalism covering the Chinese, student democracy protests and crackdown in China
mm,
in 1989. So,
yeah.
but I do wish I'd stayed longer in Japan. Like
Mm,
after IUC, I wish I'd stayed for a couple more years.
mm,
I think I probably would have made my way back into journalism that way. But
mm,
you know, I think it's really important to pursue what you're passionate about, but maybe scared
mm,
of, which in
mhm,
my case was journalism,
mm,
versus what you're comfortable with and maybe good at, but ambivalent about, which was academia. So I think
yeah.
you gotta push yourself. I
Mm,
also, one of my favorite stories, Japanese stories, it's a short
mm,
story by Akutagawa Ryunosuke called
mm,
The Spider's Thread, Kumo no Ito. And
mm,
it's about, let's just say it's about everything happening for a reason. It's a very short read. I recommend it. But
mm.
I'm not a big one for looking back and thinking I should have done this or that.
Mm. Because everything is a trade-off.
Yeah, you are where you are. I just don't believe
Yeah,
in rehashing
yeah,
the past.
yeah. Mm. So, IUC is known for its world-class Japanese language training. And
Hmm.
we have some, future students here today. But, many students today are asking a very practical question. When AI tools can translate, summarize, and interpret across languages, does deep language proficiency still give people a professional edge? What is your view? What kind of advice would you give to students who hope to use Japanese meaningfully in their careers today?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I was thinking about this and I'm sure it can be daunting. I mean, when we were studying Japanese back in the day, there were no electronic dictionaries even. It was all just surrounding your. I remember, yeah, I mean, you're just surrounded with hardcover dictionaries. And then so the first electric dictionary was a total revelation to me.
Mm,
And now I can imagine with AI and sort of Google Translate and all these translators, I can understand why people would think, is this still worth doing? There is
mm,
no substitute, and I know others on this call can probably vouch for it,
mm,
for especially in what I ended up doing. But both of those involve face to face, whether it was reporting, whether it's consulting work and advisory. There's no substitute for face to face
mm,
direct communication. And I think that is for as long as there are humans on Earth, that's going to
mm,
matter.
mm,
So, for certain things, I can see that AI would be a challenge, but when it
mm,
comes to helping a company navigate its way through the world, or helping people outside Japan understand Japan,
mm,
the importance of face-to-face communication is not going to go away, and I don't see
mm.
how AI would ever replace that.
Yeah.
Especially in
This.
Japan, I would say, where
Mm,
they often wanted to meet face to face. I
mm,
mean, I don't know whether Zoom has changed that post-COVID,
mm,
but more so than, US clients even. And I do think post-COVID, there has been this little bit of this default to like, oh, let's have a Zoom call instead of a meeting. But our Japanese clients really wanted to meet face to face, and I suspect that's still the case.
Yeah, I would say so because I'm currently in Tokyo and then doing my fellowship. I can feel that, even for academic conferences where you give presentations, people still prefer face-to-face communications. Yeah, completely agree.
Well, also, if you're doing something sensitive, I
Mm,
mean, if it's an activist shareholder matter, it's very confidential.
mm,
So you don't want more notes flying around than you need. Let's put it that way.
mm,
There are certain
mm.
conversations that really just need to be face to face.
Yeah. And the thing that you mentioned before, to sense the tone rather than just purely relying on the language, as you said before, I think you won't be able to get that from AI either, right?
Mm-mm.
Mm. Um, so we ask all our guests this final question.
Oh, sure.
What what advice would you give to current or future IUC students?
Advice to current or future IUC students. I mean, I think it's okay. I think it's number one, don't be shy. Don't be shy
Mm,
about speaking Japanese. Don't be
mm,
shy about talking to people. Don't be shy about networking. I see there is a question in here about networking. Um, and People, I think, generally like to help. They like to give
mm,
advice. They like to talk about themselves.
mm,
So, don't be shy in reaching out to people. And then the other thing which I already said, which is don't don't hide from the thing that scares. Don't avoid the thing that scares you, that you're
mm,
attracted to and that you're passionate about, but it scares you.
mm,
You should go towards that and not fall back toward the easy path that maybe you don't really care about as much, that feels safer.
mm. Wow, thank you so much, Sarah. I can see we already have a lot of questions. So I'd like to open it up to questions now. Um, Tierney, if you could share the slides um,
I
with
see
us.
questions in the chat, but I don't know how you
Yes,
guys.
Yeah,
I'll have
we will.
Kelsey share the slides because I'm still editing the slides. But yes, the questions are now all aligned. I'm prioritizing
Oh,
our
wow.
guest questions. So let's start
Wow.
from slide 9, please. Thank you.
Slide 9. Do you recall, okay, first question, do you recall any challenging interactions during your study abroad at IUC and how you were able to work around it? What did you learn from those challenging interactions?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I was once in a bar with actually Lisa Spalding was there. I don't know if she's in this chat, but we were in a bar and some guy, drunk guy, and it was like a not a typical bar. It was like a sort of old-fashioned place. I don't know how to describe it, but deliberately vintage vibe, let's put it that way. And this guy got up, drunk guy got up and started singing like anti-American World War II songs.
Wow.
I mean, look, he was drunk, you know, and people sort of tried to hush him up, but I mean, that's sort of an extreme example. There was somebody I remember at IUC who came to visit us and was sort of encouraging me to take up like Ikebana. And I was like, oh my God, I have no interest in Ikebana. I'm doing karate. I don't want to do that. And I had to sort of very politely explain why I wasn't interested. So I don't know if those count. I'm sorry. I think frankly, the most challenging interaction I had was the fact that I did not go on to do my PhD and had to tell the school that I was going to go to that I had changed my mind. That was the most challenging thing. It had nothing to do with Japan.
And so what did you learn from those challenging interactions?
What did I learn from it? I mean, I think it's very easy in the moment to get all caught up in the drama of something. And you know what? It's really not going to be that big of a deal, even 5 minutes later, let alone years later. So things that feel very overwhelming in the moment are really not in retrospect. I see there's also a question about impact on my career. It was huge because that ABC job, somebody else in the year before me from IUC had done the job. So it became one of those things that got passed down to or referred to another IUC person. So that was my first professional experience with journalism. I mean, it was huge.
Wow. Okay, next page maybe. How many questions do we have? Do we have enough time to go through
Many
all
questions,
of them?
but they are prioritized. So
Okay,
just go
sure.
through
Oh,
the first
great.
3 slides because they're from our guests. Other than that,
Okay, sure.
yeah, as far as
Great. The next one, is there any way you would have prepared differently leading up to your time at IUC?
I'm going to answer that question by saying if I was preparing to go to IUC now, I would be just watching as much. If I wasn't living in Japan, I would be exposing myself as much as possible. I would be listening to podcasts and watching videos and just listening to as much spoken Japanese as possible. That was less of an option when I went. So I don't know what I would have done differently. Maybe I could have been more creative about finding ways to just expose myself to more spoken Japanese. Yeah.
And then next question is, have you ever encountered any challenges as a female professional in Japan? If so, how did you navigate these challenges? Oh, love that question.
You know, maybe I'm really oblivious, but I have not. My Japanese clients, what they cared about was my ability to understand where they're coming from and to communicate with them. And I never felt and maybe also because at the time now Brunswick has a really big office in Japan and a lot of native Japanese speakers, but they didn't at the time. And so I was the person who was kind of bridging the gap between my colleagues and our Japanese clients. And so it didn't feel, I mean, honestly, it was, I don't think it had anything to do. I've never felt a challenge that had anything to do with gender, I don't think, or Um, I honestly can't think of one. So maybe there were
Ah,
some and I didn't notice.
mm,
But I
mm,
will say I didn't work in Japan for
mm,
a long period of time, right? I worked for ABC News. That was a foreign organization,
mm,
American news organization. Then I worked for SoftBank, but I
mm,
was going back and forth.
mm,
So I don't know that
mm,
I'm the best person to answer that question.
mm. Thank you. And then do we have more questions? So next slide. Um, do you have any advice related to networking, maybe besides, talk to people? I
Well,
mhm,
yeah, I think I would say, I understand feeling reluctant to do this, but I think the most important thing is to state
mm,
why it is you want to talk to them. So,
mm,
like the subject line is everything if you're emailing them. So,
mm,
you have to kind of write a really good headline for
mm,
why you want to talk to them. And, you know, it, and I think when I was doing, I think that's when I was trying to figure out what to do after journalism and ended up at Brunswick. I think it was, former journalist with Japan background, looking
mm,
for a new gig, or I don't know what I did, but you have to think of what is my headline that I'm going to
mm,
use to explain why I want to talk to you, right?
mm, mm,
So think about that. But when you're getting in touch with people, just be as clear as possible about why you
mm,
want to talk to them. Don't make
mm,
them do the work of trying to figure out what you want. You have
mm,
to signal why you're
mm,
interested really
mm,
clearly. I don't know if that
mm,
helps. I know it can feel, um, you know, difficult,
mm,
um, but um, but everybody does it, and
mm,
it's just, frankly, it's how things happen.
mm,
It's how people find jobs. I mean, sure, you can find things on Indeed.com or postings on LinkedIn, but I
mm,
think I think the most
mm,
satisfying connections that you make are in work or through networking and
mm,
camaraderie of the people you work with.
mm. I really love that headline analogy that you just made. It's that journalist. It's always there.
It's always there.
Yeah. So next slide, please. Mm. Many IUC students worry about maintaining their Japanese after graduation. What helped you keep your language skills alive during periods where your work wasn't closely related to Japan?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, and as I said, my Japanese did go into these fallow periods and then it came back. So I was fortunate to be in New York where I could take
Mm,
advantage of the Japan Society that had this discussion
mm,
group for advanced speakers. Those are tough though, because maybe not everybody is on the same level. There may be people who are
mm,
less advanced than you or more advanced than you. I also did some remote tutoring where
mm,
you can do that and it doesn't cost very much, where you can find a remote tutor, just somebody that you can talk with.
mm,
I would try to find someone good who's going to make you read something and then talk about it, rather than just, hey, let's
mm,
meet every week and talk about whatever. So you have to
mm,
make sure that it's rigorous. But I
mm,
think and obviously, watching and listening to as much Japanese media as you can and reading.
mm.
I'm not doing anything Japan related now,
Oh,
but I have been reading more Japanese fiction, and there are a number of female writers
mm.
who I've really been enjoying. And I think you have to push yourself. You have to work at it.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. The next question. I feel you sort of already touched upon that, but I think the audience might wanted to ask, some follow-up questions. What kinds of cross-cultural skills do you think will become more valuable rather than less valuable as AI translation improves?
Well, again, like Japanese, I mean, talk about a nuanced language. Japanese is all
Mm,
about the nuances
mm,
um, and the nuances in intonation and tone and body language.
mm,
And I just maybe I'm an optimist, but I don't think I think that um, in person that the value of in-person communication is not going to diminish. Just because AI makes some things easier, I don't know if cross-cultural skills that will become more valuable. I think it's being really attuned to the subtleties and the nuances that maybe a robot can't capture becomes more important. And that's just based on your experience either living in Japan or being in a Japanese environment is going to give you a deeper understanding that a machine can never have.
Understood.
That's not a very specific answer, sorry.
Oh, actually, it is. I think that really speaks to me because, no matter how I know people like to talk to AI these days, but I wouldn't, I would still prefer talking to, people, especially face to face. So completely understand where you came from. What about the next slide, please? Oh, okay. You mentioned that your love of Japan and all things writing were the two main through lines of your career in terms of interests. What skills have remained useful across all your different roles? Oh, interesting. And what are
That's a
some of
good
them?
question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Would you?
So the skills that are really useful is it's in the title of this talk, I think, but just as ever since I was a kid, I loved words and writing and language, and I've always I like studying language. I learn languages quickly. I'm a good mimic. Like I can imitate somebody's accent or sound, sometimes to the point where it's dangerous and people think you're better than you are. So I think so that just skill for sort of mimicry and fascination with language. I feel like that was just something, I don't know whether I was born with it. My dad certainly had it too, because he, spoke Chinese and French and a bunch of different languages. So that is a constant. And that translates into, okay, how do you help leaders of a business, executives of a business, translate their rationale into language that is persuasive and direct, and that sounds like plain English and not corporate jargon. That goes for Japanese and non-Japanese companies. So I think that runs through both journalism and corporate communications. In terms of skills I had to learn on the job, I definitely had to learn how to be more diplomatic. I mean, I think journalists can be sort of blunt, and I mean, look, when you're trying to get information out of people, you have to be persuasive as well. But when you are servicing clients and clients are paying you, you have to learn to be more diplomatic. You have to learn not just to say, if someone presents an idea you don't agree with, not just to say, no, that's a bad idea, but to say, I understand why you're saying that, but here's a better idea. So you have to be creative and diplomatic in how you present ideas and not just shut people down. You need to be a better listener. Now, you have to be a good listener as a journalist too, but it's equally true for a communications advisor. But I had to learn a different kind of diplomacy, and then I also had to learn how to generate revenue and win business, and that was not a skill that I had coming from journalism.
So we probably have time for one more last question, maybe the next slide. You've mentioned your karate sensei and the impact had on you at various points in your career. Who were some of the other mentors or role models who impacted you?
So there was a couple of professors. They're long gone, I think, but Professor Miyoshi at Berkeley, UC Berkeley. Professor Van Gessel was at UCLA when I was there. those two certainly played a role in my life. Let me think. I'll have to think about that. I mean, there were certainly people who I saw operating in Japan or in Japanese, some of my first language teachers, for example, who'd grown up in Japan, but who were Caucasian, but had grown up in Japan, but they, spoke fluently. And so that made a big impact on me. And my father,
Mm,
my father who
mm,
dedicated his life to studying Chinese law
mhm,
and who kind of, had a similar role in mediating between two cultures was a huge impact.
mm,
On entering journalism / advising career, I was just talking about this the other day with a journalist friend of mine,
mm,
and he said, if he was talking to a journalist today, he would tell them, you have to master a whole bunch of different skills, and you need to know how to podcast and how to do video and
mm,
how to tell stories in different formats at different lengths. And I thought that was really
mm,
good advice. It's not something that
mm,
I really had to deal with,
mm,
but I think he's absolutely right.
mm,
Um, and an advising career, what are some of the things that you wish you'd known?
mm.
Um, I'm again, I don't look back very often, so it's hard for me to answer, but I think I wish I'd known that when you're first starting off, you feel very insecure. And I wish I'd known that pretty much everybody feels that way when they're first starting out, except for maybe the people who are big jerks. But a lot of people feel insecure early on in their careers, and I wish I had known that kind of everybody feels that way, and that's what happens when you're new to a profession, and that you have to focus less on yourself and more on whatever it is you're doing, whether it's interviewing a person or listening to a client. It's not about you, it's about them. What are they
Mm.
saying to you? You have to pay attention to that and stop focusing so much on yourself.
Wow. I really love that advice. Thank you so much. I think that's a wonderful place to end today's talk. Thank you so much, Sarah, again, for being so generous with your time and your stories today. Um, if Trini, is it time for us to, do the
So,
breakout? Yeah.
yes.
So before we end the talk today, let's give a round of applause to Sarah, virtual.
I see all the hands. Thank you so much. This was
I
really
see all
fun.
the hands. Thank you so
I
much,
hope it
everyone.
wasn't
Thank you so much for
I hope
coming
it wasn't
today.
totally random. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for
Yes.
everybody for coming, and we'll
Kelsey, could you pull the last slide, please? We have QR codes for the feedback form. Please don't leave yet. Please do fill the feedback form. We really value your feedback, and I hope everyone learned something from today's talk. At least I learned a whole bunch, and thank you, Sarah. Big thank you again. And also thank you so much, Mariah, for being our fantastic interviewer. I know that some of you joined late, so if you are curious about what happened in the first half of the talk, you can go to the YouTube channel to check out the video, which should be available within 1 week. And if you're interested, stay tuned. We try to hold event every other month. And yes, I think that's it. Thank you again. And I'm going to give people several minutes to leave if you don't want to join the breakout rooms. Thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing other people's talks in the future. Thanks a lot.